Welcome to the Breakaway Podcast. Thanks for listening. Breakaway is a Bible study recorded on the campus of Texas A&M. For more information, visit breakawayministries.org. We hope you enjoy the talk and stick around for more at the end.
Tonight's scripture is Ephesians 6, 1 through 4. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with the promise, that it may go well with you and that you may live long in the land. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord.
Well, we've been working through the book of Ephesians this semester with your students and just happened to land in Ephesians 6 tonight. And so we're going to jump into this, but before we do, just full disclosure, it's kind of fun for me because it hasn't been too many of these Parents Weekend breakaways that I have actually been a parent. My wife and I, we are the proud parents of two little baby girls, a 2-year-old named Hannah and a 1-year-old named Sparrow. I think we got pictures of them. There's our girls. Yeah, so it makes this a little easier. I don't have to try to give sermons based on how I might raise my hypothetical kid. You know, we actually have kids now. It is a little different having a 2-year-old and a 1-year-old other than a 20-year-old, 21, 22-year-old. While you were out at Ring Day yesterday or something, there you go. We were singing Let It Go 5 times in a row at my house. And dancing around the living room. And I might have cried a little. There's some debate whether I was crying or not. But you know. So there's some differences, obviously, in the stage of parenting we're at. It's very different to be in the 20s and in the 2s, right? I mean, other than the fact that all of our kids have crazy sleep schedules and love the movie Frozen. But beyond that, there is a gap. Yet, we've got a common text to come around to talk to us about how do we live under God as children and how do we live under God as fathers and mothers. And it's interesting, I won't preach the whole text before it, but Paul has been talking about the glories of what God has done in Jesus, of sending the Son of God to forgive us and rescue us and redeem us and draw us into the family of God. And then as he begins to talk out the implications on our lives, he uses the word walk 5 times. So walk like this, walk in love, walk in purity. And then at the end, he gets into walk in wisdom. Wisdom is the idea of I know how the world works and I work well within it. That I understand how the world is meant to operate and I operate well in it. And under this idea of how to live wisely, he starts unpacking this is what wisdom looks like as it works itself out in different areas. And so as he comes to this area, he's talking about how we relate as family. And he says this is the best way to do it. If we do this, it works and it helps us and everybody wins. And so he starts by talking to the children. Here's how you interact with the father and the mother. And then he'll move to the fathers and mothers and say, this is how you interact with a child. So let's jump in first, verse 1 with the kids. It says, children, obey your parents in the Lord. Now it's funny, as soon as you read that, how often objections come up almost instantly, you know? And it's funny to even read books about it and see how many sermons or books at this point just start getting into all the caveats, you know, of like, well, maybe not this, and just kind of talking around what he's saying. And so you hear people go, that word children, I mean, that's like babies and such, right? I mean, they're talking about little kids. That's not talking about 20-year-old children. I mean, come on. But the truth is, that word children is not really about age. It's about relationship. Did you come from these people? Are they your parents? Then you're their child. And that same word, you're like, what does that word mean in the Greek, though, Ben, in the original language? It means somebody who came from the parents, and it's used of adult children at times. So you don't necessarily get out of this by being older. It's talking to us, and it says, children, obey. And there's not a lot of wiggle room in that word either. The word obey, if you look in the original language, means do what they say. And then some will look at it and go, okay, obey in the Lord. And they go, in the Lord is a caveat, meaning I obey my parents to the degree that they are saying things that are consistent with my understanding of how God wants me to live my life. So if at any point my parents are breaking off from what God says, I don't have to listen to them. And to some degree that's true, yes. Like if your parents are telling you to break the law, don't. Like if your mom or dad are saying, cook me up some meth, tell them no. That's clear, but we don't need to belabor that. Yes, that's true. Don't follow your parents into sin, immorality. That's not a biblical concept. But when that obey your parents in the Lord is in there, that in the Lord is not meant to be a limitation on the authority of the parents. It's meant to strengthen the admonition of you to obey them as a function of your worship of God. What he's saying there is obedience to parents is a spiritual issue. That spirituality is worked out in community. It's worked out in how we treat one another. And so God says, if you want to worship me, that will extend itself into how you treat your parents. And so God says, man, I don't want you to sing songs to me and then be rude to your parents. That's weird. He says, I'm not looking for that. I ordained this role of parent. And so as a function of worshiping me, I want you to interact with them in a certain way. And the way is that you obey them. You key off what they say. You're hearing them and responding to them. And you go, why does he say that? Well, he tells you, for this is right. It's the appropriate thing to do. And you go, why? Well, then he backs it up by quoting the 10 Commandments. You honor your father and your mother, for this is the first commandment with a promise, that it may go well with you, and you may live long in the land. He says, I want you to honor them. I want you to put a high value on this role of parent. You go, why? And he says, because it's a command. And what he's saying is, if you look back, the verse Paul's quoting, it's in the Old Testament. It's when Moses was coordinating this new nation of Israel, and God was giving them their laws. This is how we're going to function as a society. And as he's telling them how to function, God ordained institutions. And he didn't necessarily ordain governors and senators and things like that. He said the basic building block of the community will be the family unit. And so God says, I'm going to coordinate this nation. I'm going to coordinate this society. And so I'm going to build an authority structure. And what I'm going to build are these roles called father and mother. And they have authority. And so you come under them and you respond to them as a function of following me. And he says, and if you do that, there's a promise to that. And that is that it may go well with you and you live long in the land. Now, I know for me, when I used to hear that, it was always like, what does that mean? And people would say like, well, what he's saying is, obey your parents, because if you don't, God will kill you. Like he's going to strike you with lightning. You know, like if you talk back to your parents, it's like, don't go outside. You know, something's going to fall on you. And be like, that's what you get. You know, like it's sort of this weird, like kind of strange way to look at it. But what he's saying is, yes, individually, there's negative ramifications. But he's saying, man, in a society, I've built this society to structure in a way that we're going to win as a society if we honor these institutions. If we keep this authority structure intact, society's going to win. Because he says, I'm moving you into this land. And he was telling this nation, but if you don't value this role of parent and the responsibilities of parent to a child, if you don't hold in high regard or esteem this relationship of parent and child, he says, society's going to lose, and you're not going to flourish here. And the interesting thing is, Paul quotes it here to different people in a different day because it's a still true principle, and it's true today too. It's fascinating. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services recently pulled together numbers from 2011, and it says the poverty rate among children in female-headed families with no spouse present. So they're looking at poverty rates. They looked at two things. They said families with no dad present and families with intact father and mother relationships. And they said when looking at poverty, when you added up all the families that had both a father and a mother in the house, the poverty rate there was around 11%. 11% of those families would be under the poverty line. If you added up ones where the father was not there, 47.6% of fatherless families are living below the poverty line. It's over 4 times the amount. And you can read them all, and I won't go through them all, but it's staggering. Every year, reports come out correlating the breakdown of the family structure and the increase in drug abuse, suicide rates, high school dropout, early sexual debut of children. In almost every conceivable category you see where the family structure breaks down, the kids lose. We don't dwell long in the land. Something bad happens to us. And what's interesting, I just read this recently. The University of Alberta did a study, over 15 years of data compiled, and this is for you students, and what they found was that students who had a strong bond between parents and themselves as adolescents, it was linked to lower levels of depression, higher levels of self-esteem, and higher levels of intimacy in romantic relationships. They studied the life of people over 15 years, and they said if you have a strong, healthy relationship with your parents, they said what ends up happening as you grow older is higher self-esteem, less depression, and more healthy romantic relationships. And what's fascinating is they took a decade and a half compiling this data, and what they found is if you have a good, healthy relationship with your parents, you tend to flourish well. So at the bottom, it's like, well, if we're looking at the data right, it appears that if you honor your father and mother, it goes well with you. And it's fascinating. They did a lot of work to arrive at that, and you're like, yeah, that sounds about like something the Bible was saying thousands of years ago, that there's something connected here, that as we honor this structure, it tends to flourish. Now, before anyone gets discouraged, some of you go, well, man, we don't have mom and dad in the house, and so are you telling me we're doomed? No, you're not doomed. 100% of the directors of Breakaway came from families that were families with divorce, and God can do amazing things with all kinds of people from all kinds of family dynamics. That's the beauty of the gospel. And yet the reality is it doesn't change the principle that where the family structure breaks, people lose, and there's a lot of pain there, right? And so he's saying, man, we need to honor these institutions. They're from God. And the way the child honors the institution is that they honor and obey the parent. And so you go, what does that look like? Well, let me drop some knowledge on you. I'm going to give you 4 things, young people, and what does it look like to obey your parents? Because some of you are kind of nervous. You're like, I thought I was old enough to not obey them. I thought I could blow them off now. But let me just walk through what it means. And I'm going to give you 4 things, and they're keyed off the word obey and off the word honor. So off the word obey, 2 things. Here's the interesting thing. The word obey, if you want to look at, what does it mean in the original language, Ben? Well, it's actually the combination of 2 words, listen and underneath. It's the idea that I come under your authority and I listen to you. So what does it look like to obey your parents? Let me tell you 2 things. Number 1, it looks like listening attentively. That when your parents speak to you and they begin to give you counsel, the way you honor God by honoring this institution he built is by listening when your parents talk, listening attentively. That's a key part of it. And so when your parents start getting into advice on the phone, talking to you about laundry or bills and such, if there's a propensity in you to go, I know, that says more about your impatient and arrogant heart than it does about your nagging parents. Because the reality is part of honoring God is listening intently to your parents. So go, I'm going to listen to what they say. Don't underestimate the value they may give you. They've lived through their 20s. They know some things about this era, and they survived, right? And they might have actually been cool. It's kind of funny. I read a interview recently, and Johnny Depp has 2 teenage daughters, and they're asking them, they're like, so, I mean, are your daughters just losing their minds that they're the kids of Johnny Depp, like the coolest guy on the planet, like freaking Jack Sparrow, you know, like, are they losing their minds? And he was like, they actually don't think I'm cool at all. He was like, Robert Downey Jr. comes over, and they're like, oh my gosh, it's Iron Man. And he was like, I'm Jack Sparrow. And they're like, whatever, Dad, you're lame. You know, and you're like, his kids think he's lame. And you're like, that's Johnny Depp. He's like one of the coolest people on the planet. You're like, he's sort of shaped cool for a long time. And they think he's lame. And they're wrong, you know. But so just be open to the fact that your parents might know some things and might be cool. And so part of honoring God is listening attentively. And not just listening attentively, but listening responsively. That has a heart that's inclined to do what they say. Now, that doesn't mean you strictly do everything they say. We'll get into that. But it's inclined to obey what they say, that I have a heart that wants to respond to them, to honor their position by going, I'm going to hear that out when you're talking about how to do money or talking about how to make some decisions. Let me hear this out. Let me listen with a heart that's open. If I have a resistant heart, that anytime you give advice, I'm just closing off the doors of my heart, that's not healthy. That's not good. You don't want to have a heart like that. And you don't need to protect your adulthood. Jesus, when he was young, had his mom come to him. Remember, they were at a wedding, and she said, hey, they're out of wine. And he was like, Mom, it's not my time yet. You know, like, I'm trying to roll out this Messiah thing, and you're trying to mess with the timing, right? But if you notice, what happens is he does it. He finds a way to stay on his timetable of announcing himself. He doesn't go, oh, my mom made me, and then just go, hand me a chalice of water, wine, and make it this big thing. He kind of did it covertly. He was like, hey, you guys grab some water. Take it over there. See you cats later, all right? And next thing you know, they're partying, and Jesus is like out of there. And so he found a way to keep his messianic timetable and still obey his mom. And if Jesus Christ can do that, put himself responsibly under his mom, you can too, and it won't mess up the mission of your life. You know, it wasn't that like, well, Jesus was kind of a pansy, he was weak, and he was rolling over. No, he wasn't. He was responding to his mom, because that's right. It's good. And yet he did it in a way that didn't compromise his authority or leadership or ability to accomplish what God had built him to do in life. So part of honoring your parents is to obey. What does it look like to obey? To listen attentively when they talk and listen responsively, to be inclined to do what they're counseling you to do. And then he also says to honor them. And you go, what does it look like to honor? Well, honor means you ascribe worth to something. You put a value on it that's high. You go, that thing is valuable to me. So how do you do that to parents? How do you give honor to parents? Well, let me give you two on that one, and parents are loving this. We're going to get to parents in a minute, but we're going to keep going. There's two for that one. One is you speak graciously to them. Speak graciously to them. This is a function of the outworking of the section before it where he says, speak to one another on psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. When we speak to one another, it's in a life-giving way. It's in a redemptive way. It's sort of a gospel-soaked. If I have to disagree with you, or if I have to say, I don't think you understand where I'm coming from, or you're telling me to do this, but I don't think you understand the situation I'm in. If you have to bring in some resistance, that you do it in a way that's honoring, seeking to bless them, seeking to be responsive to them in a way that doesn't demean them at all. You're not giving them advice. Like, well, Mom, that's not really how it happens here. You know, but you're saying, Mom, can I come around this in a way that I can explain my heart, explain my situation, but it's in a way that doesn't demean you, dishonor you, but I'm going to speak to you graciously and kindly. That's how we do it, right? We had a situation recently at Breakaway. I was visiting. I didn't tell Brent I was going to tell this. I'm going to tell a story about you, Brent. But we had a situation where we were at work and Brent was over some things and I didn't understand how we were running some things. And so I came to him and I said, we're doing this and this. I don't understand how we're doing this stuff. And what I loved about Brent is Brent went, okay, well, let me walk you through it. I'm not going to give you like any excuses or whatever. Let me just talk you through what we're doing. And he talked me through kind of why we're laying out some things the way we're laying them out, how he's organizing some of the things we're doing at Breakaway. And as he explained it to me, I'm like, that totally makes sense. That's awesome. Yeah, you should do that. That's a great way to do it. Thank you. Thank you for telling me that. And I felt so honored that he didn't just go, well, just whatever you want to do, man. Like he didn't get frustrated that I was questioning, but he came to me and wanted to speak graciously to me, to tell him what was in his heart. He didn't get mad at me or impatient at me. He wasn't like, well, you try working for you monster, all right? And just kind of get frustrated, right? But he said, Ben, let me explain my heart. And he explained it in a way that never demeaned me, but it made me go, oh my gosh, thank you. Yeah, I'm so glad to know that. He loved me enough to speak the truth to me graciously. And some of you as students, that'll be a way for you to do it. If you feel like your parents and you are missing each other, that you come in and go, man, let me explain my heart, but let me do it in a way that honors and encourages them. One of the things that scared me about becoming a dad is I just counsel so many people in ministry that so much of their pain comes from their dads. And so I'm like, it's 100% chance I'm going to screw up my kid. Like, there's no way out of it. And I was scared of that moment of my daughter being like, you. And I'm like, I know, but no. She's just like condemning me. You hurt my feelings when I was. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And I would hope, and I do hope, that when they get older and I have done things wrong, and I did miss their heart on something, and I didn't respond the right way, I would hope that they could come to me in love and share that with me. And not share it in a way that's trying to win an argument, not share it in a way that demeans me or says, you're a failure, and just tries to prove they're right. But I hope they would come to me and say, Dad, when you said this is how it made me feel. Dad, when you talked about this, I didn't feel like you were hearing me. Dad, it hurt when you said that. I would hope they would speak the truth to me in love and give me the opportunity to to explain my point of view, to understand theirs, to apologize where I need to, but always in a way that's redemptive, to strengthen the relationship, not just to win. So we speak graciously. And not just graciously, but speak gratefully. Gratefully. When we honor somebody, like if we held a dinner in your honor, we would all get together and tell you what a great job you've done. And that's what it means to honor somebody, is we speak well of you. So one of the ways to honor your parents is to tell them they've done well, to celebrate them. And some of you go, well, I'm just realizing all this pain from my childhood. There were things that went wrong that I see this person and their parents gave them all this stuff. And you're like, my parents didn't give me any of that. I was robbed. I'm a victim. And we just kind of get upset. And some of that is true. Maybe you did lose some things. Maybe you didn't have some things that they had, but their family had problems too. Every family does. The first family on the planet, one brother killed another. We've been dysfunctional from the start. So if you're like, my family's so dysfunctional, welcome to humanity. All of ours are, and so all of us will have pain, and we don't need to minimize that or say, no, that's not true. We can say, hey, this happened to my family, it's hurt, and I can't cover that over, but that doesn't mean we can't be grateful for the good things we've had. And so I want to encourage some of you, look hard if you have to. Take the moment to stop and think about the good things your parents gave you. And then don't just think about them, tell them. Don't underestimate the need in your parents' heart to hear themselves reproduced in you. Tell them things they've done well. Even if you struggle with it, it's interesting, the word parent comes from the word to come into existence. And some of you are like, I can't think of what to thank them for. Well, you exist. Start there, right? Steve Jobs, before he died, went on a search for his birth mother. And his interviewer asked him why. Why did you do that? And he said, I wanted to thank her. I just needed to express gratitude. And he said, for what? And he said, for not aborting me. And he said, she was a young mom, not married, scared, being pressured to turn me loose, and she didn't. And she made some hard decisions, and she sacrificed to bring me into this world. And there was a whole sea of pain in his story, and he responded in not great ways, in a million ways, but he felt this impulse to be grateful. And some of you, you're going to look in your life and see, man, my parents did teach me this, and I got this right. Some of us are lost with money, and other of us go, man, my family helped me think about that. Some of us don't understand hospitality. Some of us got how to do that. Some of us, we're going to find different areas where we struggle, that we got different things right. Or if anything else, this came out this week. The U.S. Department of Agriculture put out a report this week that stated that raising a child in the U.S. for 18 years, if your child's arrived at 18, raising a child for 18 years cost your parents just under $250,000. That's before college money. So if you're bitter at your parents at all for maybe some things that didn't go well in your life, before you get too judgmental, ask yourself, what human being have I dropped $250,000 on? Like if I was to ask that question, who spent roughly $250,000 on somebody else's best interest? I don't think any students in here could raise their hand. Parents would be like, well, that's about right. So before we start trashing them, we got to think for a second. You're like, oh man, how much? If I added up how much money I've spent on any other human being, what would you get it? Like a $10, 25? I don't know, $100. So they've sacrificed for you. And here's the last thing, and then I'll get on to parents. It's interesting. This will date me, but I grew up listening to Pearl Jam, and Pearl Jam, their early music, it was so bitter at their parents. You know what I mean? Like they were mad, you're still alive, she said, but do I deserve to be? Just kind of like, is that the question? And just so mad at their parents. And, now he's older, and I saw him in an interview, and he was just talking about all these things about his parents he's grateful for. And it was interesting to watch that, and I go, you see that all the time. People are processing their emotions and trying to figure them out in their 20s, and so it all gets mixed around, and sometimes it can come out in anger in different ways. But as time goes on and you become a parent and understand the challenges of it, you appreciate them more. And that's a normal process. It's healthy, but it's not particularly spectacular. How do you know the Spirit of God is really working in a human being? When you get a 20-year-old that is grateful for their parents and honors them. I promise you, if you go home and you tell your parents, I want to thank you for these things that you've deposited in my life that are good and made me who you are, they will go, surely there is a God in heaven and he is in our midst. Right? The world marvels at that, right? Marvels at that, and it's a beautiful thing. It's right. It's beautiful. On to parents. Okay. We'll do it quickly. It says, fathers, do not provoke your children to anger. Here's the interesting thing. With the children, it's a pretty harsh thing. Like, you need to respond to them. You need to obey them. And there's an impulse in children sometimes to want to pull away from their parents to be autonomous. And he's telling them, no, you need to submit to them, obey them. But there should be a separation. And he puts the onus on the parent. He tells the parent, the father, you have to not provoke them to anger. You have to raise them in a way that doesn't frustrate them or discourage them. And you go, why doesn't it point out the mom? Well, the mom's in this. It says, honor the parents, honor your father and your mother. But then when Paul gets to the rebuking, he just gets to dads. So you put that in your filter of how you want to respond to that. But he just says, I want to put the responsibility of guiding the development of the child in the camp of fathers. And I don't know if anyone in here would complain, well, that's the problem with our nation. Too many fathers taking responsibility for their families. Here we go again. I think we would all say that's not bad to stress that to dads. But he warns them, don't provoke your child to anger. And you go, well, how do you do that? Let me give you 2 ways you can provoke your child to anger. And these aren't encouragements. I'm trying to get you away from these 2 things. One is by being overbearing. By being overbearing. One commentator wrote, this rules out excessively severe discipline, unreasonably harsh demands, abuse of authority, arbitrariness, unfairness, constant nagging, condemnation, subjecting a child to humiliation, all forms of insensitivity to the child's needs or sensibilities. And I would add to that the constant pressure to succeed and pressure on their decisions, nitpicking of their little decisions, impatience with their process of development, trying to control too much the course of their lives. You'll see at times parents want to determine what their student majors in or what they do for a living, and that's not a healthy thing to do. God's wired different students to do different things. It's interesting, Bono. I mean, one of the most successful band in the history of bands, his dad didn't respect rock music for years. Wanted him to be, like an accountant or something, and he's running the biggest rock band on the planet, massive arenas sold out. And his dad's like, yeah, you and your silly pastime playing rock music. And you're like, Dad, get on board with the fact that this is what he's built to do. Don't frustrate him by trying to make him something he's not, right? Or it's interesting, Time Magazine put this out last year. It was a study from the Journal of Child and Family Studies. And they were studying college students and the impact of parents calling professors about grades, constantly texting, stalking them online, things like that. And it says this, the professor of psychology at the University of Mary Washington that ran the study said this, parents that do this sort of constant overbearing, over-involvement, it says parents are sending an unintentional message to their children that they're not competent. When adult children don't get to practice problem-solving skills, they can't solve problems. And here's the interesting thing. They said they did a number of surveys across college-age students, and they found that helicopter parenting, trying to be involved in every decision, pressuring them about grades and all these sorts of things, it says it decreased the adult child's feeling of autonomy and feeling of competence. And in turn, that feeling of incompetence led to increased reports of depression and dissatisfaction. So what they found is this impulse in parents to want to parent and control the moment because they're trying to help their child, right? Help them get good grades, help them pay the bills, help them do this thing. By digging into all the decision making, what they were doing is actually hurting the kid. And so one way to provoke a child to anger, one way to hurt him is this overbearing way of relating to them. By this stage in their development, the relationship of parent and child should be far more advising than deciding. Far less commanding and far more counseling, right? It's interesting, the book of Proverbs, if you've read the book of Proverbs, it's all a father writing to a son about how to live his life. And it's the father is speaking it as an advisor to the child. And he's telling him, hey, this is how some people are going to want to cut corners, son, to get away financially. Don't listen to them. He's going to say, here's some people that are going to want to be very unsafe in the way they express their sexuality. You be careful. Here's the mindset. Here's what they'll be thinking. Here's what you'll be tempted to think. But here's where that road goes. Don't lead down that road. And he's not giving demands in the book of Proverbs. You don't hear him say, you will not go to that person's house. What's their name? I forbid you. He doesn't say that. But he's advising. Here's the reason behind it, son. Here's the decision you're going to make, and I want you to make the right one. So let me give you some counsel on it, but you go out there and make it. And the book of Proverbs was written from a father to young sons. It was taught in Hebrew to children that were 13, 14, 15, 16. That already by the teenage years, they're saying, I'm moving into an advisory capacity, not a deciding capacity, right? That we may provoke them to anger if we're over-controlling. And yet the other way to provoke them to anger is not by being overbearing, but by disappearing. Some people don't want to be that helicopter parent that's all over their kids, so they pull way too far back. And that can hurt too. It's interesting, McGill University in Canada just put out a report, and it says, growing up without an involved parent can permanently alter the structure of a brain and produce children who are more aggressive and angry. Isn't that crazy? Children brought up without an involved dad have higher risks of developing what they call deviant behavior. They were studying paternal deprivation on neurobiology. And here's the interesting thing. They're studying neurobiology of parental deprivation. And what they found was where parents are depriving their students of being interacted in their life, he says what it finds neurochemically is it produces anger. It provokes them to anger. So you can frustrate a child if you're overbearing, texting them every single day. Are you eating peanuts now? You know? Or by disappearing and pulling back. And some of us know that feeling. And here's why both of those hurt. It's because in both of those scenarios, the kids don't get what they desperately need, and that is the affirmation that they're loved. The overbearing is pushing on them, saying it's not enough. And the disappearing, there's just no one telling them if they're doing good, if they're measuring up, if they're succeeding. And that's hard. That's deeply painful. I read the biography of Mike Tyson, which I would absolutely not recommend to you. But he completely ties some of the horrible decisions he made relationally and financially all to the fact that he didn't have an involved parent. Kurt Cobain, in some of his final interviews, they asked him, man, what drove some of the anger in your lyrics? And he said, the disappearance of my parents, their lack of involvement in my life. It was interesting to hear this like rocker be like, what's the most painful thing? My parents disappearing, pulling back. And so overbearing, disappearing can hurt a kid. And you go, well, Ben, well, I don't want to be overbearing, so I want to back up. But I don't want to back up, so I'm in their life and you're saying too much. Where am I supposed to land? I'm not supposed to be in too much. I'm not supposed to be too far back. Where am I supposed to be? There's this wide open center place called advising. Not overbearing, not disappearing, but advising. He says, bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. That I want to speak to them in a way that brings them up, raises them up to the level of a peer. And I do it by training, by teaching them things they don't know. And I do them by instructing. That's the combination of the words brain and place. I place things in their brain that aren't there. And there's a lot of things that aren't there. There's things they need trained on, right? I meet students that are brilliant. In like 3 years, they'll be launching rockets to the moon, but they don't know how to pay bills. They're like, why is our power shut off? You're like, someone needs to help you with this. Just kind of talk you through how to do it, right? Basic cleaning, hygiene. Why do we keep getting sick? Well, you've never bought a cleaning product in your house. There's a direct correlation. I mean, there's some things you can speak into, right? I'll tell you the open avenues. Your child's insecurity. Am I making the right decisions? Am I going to measure up? Am I going to succeed? Insecurity is so real at this age. And their ever-widening world of new experiences. These are two places that your child is entering into that you can speak into their life and really provide some help. How do you do it? Can I encourage you in their advising capacity? Ask a lot of questions first. That don't react in fear when they tell you some ideas, but respond with a question, press in closer. So when they call you and say, hey mom, this summer, I want to go to a mission trip in the Ukraine. You don't say, all right, everybody. You kind of hold that back and go, okay, tell me where that's coming from. Like, why do you want to go there? Why do you want to be there? What's your heart about in that? Who are you going with? Who's this organization? Have they ever been before? Are they experienced at this? What about the funding? What would it do? What would it do to your college? Are you carrying debt? What would it do to your ability to raise money? Do you need to work instead? What about your timeline in college? How will it do this? And ask them questions that help them make the decision. And press in and ask them. And what you may find is the two of you growing together into this new relationship of more like a peer. Right? And so I press in with a question. And then when I press in with a question, then there'll be places where we run out of limits of their knowledge and I can speak into that wisdom, right? And that's the way to do it. And that's the way again, it's so easy to say that. We were laughing at our house the other day. I wanted to put in a security system at our house. And I'm like, we can set up cameras, like around their rooms and stuff. And I can't, someone asked me, how long do you want to keep them up? And I'm like, I don't know, until like they're in college, just see what they're doing. I mean, so I know that impulse, right? And yet, what are we doing? Here's where I'll close. And thank you for letting me go for a while on this, but I'm processing all this myself. But what's interesting is he tells the child to obey in the Lord. And he tells the parent to bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. Why does he do that? Well, why do we resist these roles? Why as a child are we afraid to respond to our parent in obedience? Why as a parent do we fear letting go our child and not provoking them to anger? Why do we fear these things? We want to control because we're scared. Right? And so the only way we're not going to react in fear but react in faith is by obeying in the Lord, is by advising in the Lord, is by ultimately going, as a parent, I can't control where their life goes, but there's someone who does. And as a child saying, you know what, I can't control everything my parent does, but I know the one who owns all things, put the stars in place, right? And so we come and go, I trust the Lord with my child's life. I trust the Lord with my parent's life. I trust the Lord with my life and my family's life. I trust him. And then the other fear I think we have, and the reason why sometimes we avoid texts like this, is sometimes we try to downgrade these roles of trying to make the father role not as significant as it is, or the mother role not as significant as it is, or the child responding to the parents as big a deal. We try to minimize these roles. And I think it's because if we let them stand in their full height, of a child responding to the Lord, of a parent saying, I'm ordained by God to raise you, if we think of them in those terms and see that lofty goal of I'm being ordained by God to raise a human being, all we think about is how far short we've fallen. And the more we think about the loftiness of these goals, the more defeated we can feel because we go, I don't measure up. But that's why we're given these passages in the Lord. That's the beauty of the gospel. The Lord there is talking about Jesus Christ. And the beauty of the message of Jesus is Jesus keeps the standard super high, perfection. And it makes us feel crushed. I can't attain that. And the answer of the gospel is, I know. And that's why Jesus came. He came to live the perfect life we could not, to be the perfect caretaker, perfect lover of the human soul. And he took all the sin of humanity, the punishment of our failure, away from us. He who knew no sin became sin on the cross. And he buried it, and he rose, and he extends to us forgiveness and the power to live a better life than we could possibly live on our own. And that's the beauty of the gospel, is that we can come and say, there's a lofty goal for a child. There's a lofty goal for a parent that I can't meet on my own. And yet the gospel gives me the freedom to call myself a failure because Jesus' arrival is the declaration that I can't live up to my roles. I am a failure. His very arrival is the condemnation of us that we need a Savior. So when we come in and say, I'm not measuring up as a parent, we can say, I'm not measuring up as a parent. Of course not, because I'm a sinner, because I'm broken. But praise be to God that he comes and he forgives and cleanses and restores and empowers me to live a better life than I ever could as my own. And as a child, you might be sitting here and go, oh my gosh, I was rude to my parents on the way here. I'm such a failure. Of course you are a failure. But that's the beauty of the gospel, is that as you come to it, you say, we're all failures. Every single one of us. And yet Jesus Christ comes and he forgives and he restores and he empowers. And he can take the most broken of families and mend them. He can take an Adam and Eve's family where the children were killing each other, and out of that line bring forth a Jesus who heals the nations. He can take your family. I don't care how broken you think it is. It doesn't scare him. He can step into any broken family, any broken heart, and he can take things that you thought might be forever bent and make them straight, forever broke them and make them whole. That's the power of the gospel. So we walk as children in the Lord and parents in the Lord. And you watch what he does as we walk in faith with him. He replaces fear with faith, and it's beautiful. It's right. It will go well with us, and we'll all win.